You ready to hit our follow-up?
Let's do it.
All right, so first one here on the list. I'm to encourage Becky to read it. That's what it says on the list, but I know that is referring to the book Who Moved My Cheese, and my wife finished reading it here a few days ago. She read it in 2 sittings, so kudos to her. She had some interesting feedback on it, mostly, really, there's a book for this? Was her reaction. It was interesting, but it has led to some fun conversations, and those have been enjoyable. I've had a good time talking through, now that you and I have gone through that one, it's kind of interesting to sit down and do that again with my wife and get her perspective on it. So it's been interesting. I've enjoyed that process with her.
Nice. I actually just gave a talk at Toastmasters before I came here on Who Moved My Cheese.
Nice. I still like the book, even though my wife is not convinced of the joy of that book.
I will say that it was fun doing the Toastmasters project because I'm in a storytelling book, and so I was supposed to do a folk tale, and I cheated kind of and retold Who Moved My Cheese. But retelling it, I was able to kind of cherry pick the pieces that I really liked out of it.
Oh,
because
nice.
you've only got 7 to 9 minutes to tell the whole thing anyway, so you physically can't cover everything. And I like my version a lot better.
Nice. Maybe I should get you to record that sometime, and we'll just post it to Bookworm.
Yeah, it was fun.
Cool. You got a couple here on the list?
Yeah, so I don't have specifically data to support being willing to laugh at myself, but
I was
I'd
going
like
to
to
ask how you were going to record that one.
I think it's more just a reminder. It seems like a lot of my follow-up items tend to be that sort of thing. So, yeah, I guess next time you see me, laugh at me and see how I respond.
All right. Will do.
And the other one, remodeling office space. Haven't done anything more with this, but then we've been gone for a couple weeks. So probably since the last time that we talked, I really haven't had the chance to do anything with this. We've submitted all of our tax information, so we're waiting till we hear back from our accountant about what kind of return we're going to get before we commit to spending a lot of money to finish off the office. But it looks like that's going to happen in the next probably month or two.
See, here's the thing. There are a number of us now listening to you talk about this tax return, knowing that we will not get one. So for those of you out here who are like me, who run your own business, a tax return is a thing that does not exist ever.
I have lots of dependents, remember.
Because if you happen to overpay, they simply hold on to it until the next quarter and use it for that. Like, you're not going to get anything back ever.
True. I don't know. I guess this is the first year we've done it this way. But last year, even though my work situation had changed, we still got a little bit of a return. And this year, we have an additional dependent. So I think maybe we'll get a return. Maybe.
Nice. Fun. All right. You want to talk about this Apple script? You've been bugging about me on this. Yeah.
Actually, the question is, do you want to talk about this Apple script?
Yes, I do. I looked into this because I wanted to know, okay, how much time is it going to take for me to pull this off? And before I go too far, take me through, and more for the listeners than me, because I got to listen to the recording of this a couple times just to make sure that I understood what you were after. But explain to the listeners what you're after with this Apple script and day one.
Well, basically, what I want to do is I want to be able to jot real quickly what I am focused on, but that can't happen on my phone, I realize, because I won't take the time to pull my phone out and enter what I happen to be focused on at the moment. But if I'm on my computer, which I am pretty much all during the working day, which is really when I want to track this stuff anyways, then an Apple script, there's a lot less friction there. So I think that having it be on my Mac instead of an iOS device would be enough for me to make this sticky. Does that make sense?
So effectively, it's a recurring pop-up on your computer that asks what you're doing right now.
Yep.
And when you fill it in and you hit enter, it logs it to day one. Right?
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. Now, what you need to know is that day one does not have AppleScript support.
Boo.
So that's on day one. However, they have CLI support, command line interface support, which means that if we do this, it is possible to make this process happen. But it will require, the end user will have to install the command line. I'm trying to think of how to explain this for people who don't get it. It's shell scripts. So you have to install this package for day one in order for the Apple script to do anything, which I think actually is technically going to end up being like an automator service of some sort, but it all works effectively the same. But you would have to be comfortable installing two separate pieces in order for it to work. Is that okay?
I guess we'll find out. I would think so.
Okay, because I can't, from the service or the Apple script side of it, I can't install that for you. That's a security risk. They should never allow that. So I'm not going to be able to say, install this one thing and you're done. But I can say, if you install this package, and I can link to it, give you instructions on it, and install this Apple script, do you want the time period to be configurable? Like you've talked about every hour. Does that need to be able to change per person?
That's a good question. I would say that the simplest solution is invariably the best solution. So let's just go with 1 hour.
Okay, hard coded in. Okay, now all my questions aside, I'm going to put a bounty on this, and I did some research into, can I do something in WordPress that makes this possible? And I believe I have found a plugin, Mike, that lets me say, okay, you can donate via PayPal up until this dollar amount is hit, and once that dollar amount is hit, then you don't go over, and then everybody can see a status at the same time, if I understand it correctly, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to put this in place. I don't have any idea what the link will be, but by the time this particular show goes live, I'll have the link in the show notes. So if you're interested in this script for having your Mac nag you every hour to log something to day one and do it automatically for you, you can go to the link in the show notes. That will give you a page to where you can donate. I'll set the bounty for it. My gut feel is it's around 300, Mike, 350, somewhere in there, just to get the whole thing pulled together and get all the documentation and everything for it. So I'm going to set one of those two. I got to figure out the exact hours on it, but that number will be on the page if you go to the link in the show notes. So scroll down, click, go to the page. There you go. And we'll go from there. Once we hit the bounty, I'll go to work.
Nice.
Fun. Wow, I can't believe you're like hiring me out on this stuff now. All right, fun times. So now that we're done with follow-up, unless you got something else you want to go through.
Nope.
Oh, happy day.
Let's jump into the book.
The book for today, The Personal MBA. This book, it's by Josh Kaufman, and this is one that I saw mentioned by Sean Blanc via, I believe it was Twitter. There's probably no way I'm going to find that tweet. It's been a while. It's probably been a year plus ago about at this point. He mentioned this book, said he really enjoyed it. I have been told by multiple supervisors that I should go get an MBA. I almost went for it, but I could never get the math to line up on why I should get an MBA versus like the amount of money I was going to put into it versus the salary bumps I would get for having it. Like I could never get the math to work out.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't do it. And over time, I've never been in a situation where I feel like I have needed it or wanted it. So whenever I saw that this book was something that was potentially an alternative and kind of a crash course for an MBA, and I saw Sean Blanc recommending it, I thought, give it a shot. I'll drag Mike along for the ride and see how this goes. So here we are.
Josh Kaufman thinks that you made a good choice.
Does he? Cool.
Yeah, he talks about at the very beginning of the book exactly what you were
Oh,
just
right.
describing about how the cost of an MBA doesn't really pay for itself, and how a lot of the information that you need to learn for an MBA type degree is kind of changing and evolving. And by the time that you would go to an MBA program to get the knowledge that they would teach you, it's kind of out of date. And so I've also thought that the same thing, that I should go get an MBA, crunch the numbers, and say, this really isn't worth it. So this has been on my list for a long time, but I also knew it was very long, and that was enough to make me procrastinate on actually reading it.
Right. I will say, whenever I started this process, I've always got 2 or 3 business ideas that I'm bouncing around inside my head, and I will say it's very helpful to have those if you're going to read this, because it immediately gives you an example to work through, because he goes through a ton of information, and I just found it extremely helpful to have. Okay, this particular business is one that's on the forefront of my mind. I'm really interested in taking it forward and seeing how I can promote it and make it something big. Going through this book while having that on my mind was really enlightening and helped me understand the concepts in a much better way.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that he mentions at the very beginning, the first talking point that we had written down, just to kind of set everybody's expectations for this book, if you haven't read it yet, is that it doesn't give you the answers, but it helps you ask the right questions. And I would say that is definitely true. And so if you approach this book through a lens, like you were saying, where have this business idea or this idea for a project or a venture, whatever, it will help you ask the right questions to determine whether this thing is actually viable or something that you should be doing, or whether it's just one of those pie in the sky ideas that's really not something that you could monetize, and therefore it's not really worth the time and the effort that you would invest in it. And I didn't realize how important being able to ask the right questions really was. But I kind of had that same experience after I read the book. Was like, when I was viewing some different projects and things through what I was learning as I was reading the book, it just crystallized a lot of things for me, and the answers became super, super clear as soon as you knew what questions to actually ask.
So here's a question for you, because you have a business degree, right?
Yes.
So he's bashing business degrees at the beginning, not a bachelor's, but the master's. Uh, what's your take on that? Given you have a business degree, and we're kind of down that path, the content that he covers here and his attitude, I guess, towards academia in the business world, did that strike you as a very negative thing? Did that make you angry? What was your take on it? Because I don't have a full business degree.
No, he's 100% right. It's an absolute complete waste of time and money.
All right.
Of course, I have a liberal arts business degree, so it was
Oh.
probably twice as expensive. And yeah, the classes that I really benefited a lot from were not the ones that really had anything to do with business. The standard business classes, the statistics, the accounting, I basically muscled my way through those classes and retained absolutely nothing from them. There was 1 or 2 classes in particular where I actually did learn a lot, and it was more so mindset stuff, like how to think about different problems. In fact, one of my classes, which was my senior capstone class, the teacher would have us do case studies to bring in newspaper articles, usually Wall Street Journal articles, and we'd discuss, this company made this specific decision, and then we kind of dissected, did they make the right decision or not? Why? We did some simulations, and one of the big projects that we had to do was this thing where we broke up into separate small groups, basically, and we had a semester-long project where we were running a shoe company, which was part of this simulation. But other than that, like the actual information that I was taught that appeared on the test was definitely not worth the amount of money that I paid for it. And once you get out into the business world, you figure out a lot of these things based out of necessity that never really were taught in business school. So when I was going to school, it was 2001 to 2005. and the internet was kind of just getting going. In fact, one of the case studies that we did was on Amazon. I remember that one specifically. And so the landscape of especially internet-based business has changed a lot since I was in school, but I can't imagine that even now they are teaching the kinds of inbound and content marketing type ideas that you need, grow your email list. I guarantee that's not being taught in the business program at St. Norbert College where I went to school, but that's the kind of thing
Right.
that really has been beneficial to me, is that type of stuff where I've learned it pretty much through trial and error.
So it sounds like you would see this the same way I see a computer programming degree. Like people go to school to learn how to build programs and write code. And by the time they get out of a 4-year school and they're done with it, most often I run across people who are talking about how great Java is and, it's going to be the thing of the future. And it's like, I don't know anybody that thinks that. Like
Yep.
everybody I talk to is talking about Python and Rails. Like they don't really talk about. Okay, all right. I know I probably offended a few people there, but that's okay. I just don't see the schools keeping up with how fast things are moving. Things just take off, and if you're going to build a degree around it, by the time they get the books written, like what was the one where they talked about the time it took to write a textbook, like being 8 to 12 years or something like that?
Yep. It's
Like, okay,
completely ridiculous. And in fact, there's another resource that this book reminded me of called the $100 MBA, which is Omar Zenholm, I believe.
okay,
He was actually in academia. He was a professor, and he wanted to teach his students not how to manage factories because that's not what they were going to be doing, but he wanted to teach them some of this internet marketing stuff where he was a professor. And I can't remember specifically where he said that he was a professor, but he went to get the curriculum changed, and it was going to take years before it was approved. And so what he did is he basically distilled everything that he knew about business into a video course that you can pay a one-time $100, $100 MBA, and get this sort of information as well. I think that is really the key. And this is actually one of the points. The very end of this book, he talks about how self-education is never done. The people who are successful are not the ones who have paid a bunch of money and gotten a piece of paper, but they are the ones who are continually looking to improve their skill set. And that's where this book, I believe, has a lot of value.
all right. So let's jump into some of the things that are brought up within the book. One of them that I thought was pretty interesting was he goes through the process for evaluating a market, and he had these 10 steps that if you look at the 10 steps and look at the market that you're thinking about going into. See, this is why I say it's helpful to have a potential something in your head, because you're going through this. Okay, how do you evaluate this market? If I've got an idea in my head, I'm immediately starting to consider the pieces of that market or that business as they apply to this. So anyway, the 10 ways to evaluate a market. I'm just going to run through them quick because I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. But the 10 steps of evaluating a market: urgency, how badly do people want or need it right now? The market size, how many people? The pricing potential, what's the highest price you could charge for it? Cost of customer acquisition, how easy is it to find somebody to buy it? Cost of value delivery, how much does it cost to create and deliver the thing? Uniqueness of the offer, is it a complete niche? The speed to market, how fast can you create it and get it out the door? The upfront investment, how much it takes to get going. Upsell potential, can you, do an upsell? Evergreen potential, does it ever need to be updated because it's, what do I want to say? It's timeless, that type of thing. So anyway, I thought it was interesting to look at all of those, and the more of them that your potential business could hit, the better off you are. And this is helpful as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's always coming up with ideas. It immediately showed me, it made me want to go pull up my business ideas list and just run through it. Like, yes, no, 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 no. Oh, great. Like, it just
Right.
made me want to do that. So it was a framework to help me go through them and to get through it a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly. And you're supposed to, for these 10 different things in the book, he talks about rating each of them on a scale from 1 to 10. And then you add them all up at the end. And if the total score is below 50, it's a bad idea and you should move on. If it's 50 to 75, it's got some potential, but it's going to need a lot of effort. If it's 75 or above, very promising, full speed ahead. And these type of things, this whole section was maybe just a couple of pages, but this is the type of thing that this book is chock full of. And even if this was the only thing that you got out of this book, it's still going to be very beneficial. And there's a whole bunch of them. I think he says at the beginning that there are 248 simple concepts that are part of this book. And so I would argue that if you are involved in any sort of business whatsoever, you're going to find something in here, whether you've got an MBA or not, that you're going to just be like, wow, that's amazing. I could apply that right now. And that's going to make this thing so much simpler for me.
So the concept that it was only 2 pages on this particular piece, yeah, that whole thing drove me nuts. I'm going to get into that later. There was a big piece of this book that just made me angry. Anyway, we'll get into that later. You've got a thing on here, frustration leads to burnout. Where are you going with that?
Yeah, he just talks about his experience with Procter & Gamble, and he tells a lot of his story throughout the book, especially at the beginning, where he kind of outlines his process and how he was climbing the corporate ladder and he was going to do this stuff, and then he just kind of stopped and rethought things and was like, I don't know if this is really what I want to do. And there were 3 big takeaways from his P&G experience, which I thought were really good and definitely something that people probably don't ever stop to think about, but is something that you really should think about if you find yourself in one of these organizations. Number 1, large companies move slowly. Number 2, climbing the corporate ladder is an obstacle to doing great work. And then number 3, frustration leads to burnout. So specifically, frustration leading to burnout, I just wanted to tease that one out because if you are frustrated with your particular work situation right now, Josh's experience, and I think kind of the default experience, is that if you don't figure it out, if you don't fix it, then it's only going to be a matter of time until you actually exit. And so there's probably a lot of people who maybe are listening to this right now and they're thinking, well, I'm really frustrated with my work, but I have no intention of leaving. Unless you figure out how to reconcile those things in a few years, you're going to find yourself leaving. And so I kind of saw this as a warning sign because, as we talked about in the last couple of books, a lot of this stuff is on us as individuals. It's not on the company's fault. It's not the organization's fault because of our particular situation, but how do we take accountability for this? How do we take responsibility for this and fix it from our perspective instead of just projecting the blame onto the organization? Because there's a lot of big organizations, I think, that offer a lot of really good potential jobs and a lot of really good potential careers. And that's completely fine if you want to be involved in that particular thing. And I just want to throw this out there because I don't want people to be forced to leave just because they are at a crossroads right now and they don't realize it. And they just continue to put one foot in front of the other. And pretty soon they're in the same position where, oh, I never really thought about this, but yeah, I've been frustrated for years. I got to get out of here.
Yeah, I always tell people that if you're frustrated in the position that you're in, you need to do one of 2 things. You either need to think about your job differently. Don't be one who's blaming and being the don't have the victim thinking. Get to work and do something and make it better, or get yourself promoted out of that position. Do something. Don't just sit tight. But if you're in a position where the organization will not let you get better and will not let you continue to grow, that's when you need to start looking at leaving. But if you're burnt out because of your own doing, and I would venture to say that most cases it's your own doing, then you need to do something about it. Don't put it on somebody else. Take responsibility for it.
Exactly. There's a lot of systemic problems that can be solved as soon as we recognize that this is actually a system and we can just change some of the inputs if we want to get different outputs. And that was another thing that I wrote down here, is that success is based on mental models and systems. And he used the example of Charlie Munger. That's one of the things that I've really learned in my work with Asian efficiency, is that we maybe don't realize it, but everything around us is part of a independent and interdependent system. And so if you don't like the results that you're getting, tweak the system. And a lot of times, even just small tweaks to the system can produce really monumental results and changes, which is why this book, in my opinion, and I know we're going to get to the ratings and stuff later, but I really enjoyed it because there's a lot of little things in here, a lot of potential sources of revelation and inspiration where they can provide a blueprint for a small tweak to a system that can change a situation from bad to good.
Yeah, I like the whole system thinking, but we're tech nerds. We like
Mm-hmm.
systems. And I'm a programmer. I'm always trying to put things into a system and make it work out for me.
Yep.
Just the way I think, I suppose.
And he talks about how every business is made up of 5 interdependent systems, which I thought this part was really valuable too. Number 1, value creation. So what value are you giving to the world? Number 2, marketing. And we've talked about this before. I'm terrible at self-promotion, but this is a big part of any business system. If you want to be successful, you have to market yourself. Number 3, sales. This is another thing that people tend to shy away from, but you have to ask for the sale. Value delivery. So once you have made the sale and you've promised something to the customer, you have to be able to deliver that. And then 5th is finance. So these businesses being made up of these interdependent systems, this was maybe something that seems really straightforward and common sense. But when he laid them out in the book, he kind of showed how you go from one to the next. And this part I thought was really good. Some of the later stuff where he talks about systems, I thought he has a whole section devoted to systems at the end. I thought maybe I wasn't as impressed with that. A lot of that stuff was pretty elementary, I thought. But this part at the beginning where he's really literally deconstructing, this is what a business is. Every single business is going to follow this specific formula. And then you can real quickly identify, oh yeah, my business, I'm stuck at this point. I haven't asked for the sale.
Yeah.
That I think is really valuable.
You're not going to sell anything if you don't ask them to buy.
Yep,
That's
exactly.
the way it goes. It's helpful because he really breaks down an MBA or business and how you do business. He breaks it down into these big categories and then goes through the category in, I don't know if I want to say a high level or a deep level. It's almost both. It's kind of weird how he goes through it, but he starts off, and maybe I'm backing up here. Maybe I'm just going crazy. He starts off with value creation. A business is going to have value that it's coming up with or deriving from nothing or out of some base materials. It's developing something new. And then he walks you through the process of, what does that value look like? How do you go about showing that value? How do you market it? How do you do the sales? How do you deliver it? He goes through the whole thing. And he's got a bunch of little details of how to technically pull those off. And to me, the section of this that really stood out, Mike, was the marketing section, because so much of the online world and development world, how do you go about promoting this stuff? And there's a good chance I'm not going to see that person in person. So the sales process has to be entirely digital and mostly automated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of weird how that all has to work out. So if you look at the concepts and the methods that he gives you in here and try to overlay that on the digital world, it's kind of interesting how it can all play out, because you start to see things like the freemium model that we're all familiar with now. This thing is free. If you want these special features, then you pay this subscription. Like, the details of why that works is fascinating to me, because he explains why that stuff works out. And I'm not going to dive into that. You'll have to read the book. Sorry. There's some interesting backstories behind a lot of that. And the more that I get into software development, the more I realize the freemium model works. And here's something, everybody seems to talk about millennials and make fun of them lately, but it's kind of the in thing to do. But technically we are one, or how did my grandfather say that? I are one. So it's interesting because we really just don't like people pushing opinions on us. We don't like people telling us how to act or how to do things. And a lot of marketing is trying to help us and force us to see or do something we may not want to do. Like, there's so much of that trying to trick us into doing things. So the radar that goes off of "don't make me buy that" comes out a lot for me. And a lot of the marketing methods that he spells out, some of them I'm like, you do that and I'm never buying from you. Like, there is
Right.
some of that. But the concept of give me something free and then let me test it, let me dip my toe in the water, that one really resonated with me. That's why I wrote down freemium model here, because it's something that I find that works really well in the tech world. And I think that might be because so many people are against the ram it down my throat type of marketing.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example of one of the things that he says in there, that marketing is not selling. Marketing is getting noticed. Sales is closing the deal. And a lot of people can't differentiate those two when they're talking about the freemium model, because they see, well, I'm getting the app for free, so how am I going to make any money? How am I going to monetize? And to be fair, some companies that embrace the freemium model, they don't worry about that. They don't even think about it. They just try to acquire as many customers as they can, because that extends their runway from a startup perspective. And then they they decide that they're going to figure out the money thing later. But and that's obviously not a not a great approach either. But there's a lot of really great marketing ideas in here. Not just the freemium model, but also like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he talks about number 1, physiology, number 2, safety, 3, belongingness and love, 4, esteem, 5, self-actualization. And the idea here is that you're going to move down or up this pyramid, I guess, where you're going to satisfy level 1 needs, and then you're going to go to level 2 needs, and you're going to go to level 3 needs. But really, when it comes to sales and whatever you're trying to sell, like you are meeting a need at some specific level. And some people don't realize that, well, because we're not worried about, getting eaten by mammoths and stuff like that, that we don't have to worry about those needs, but the needs just change. And so you have to recognize that, whether you interpret it the way that Maslow did, or the other one that I really liked is the ERG model that he talks about in here. And we even mentioned this, I think, on the previous episode a little bit, where you've got existence. So first of all, have to make sure that I'm going to survive. And then from there, you want to improve your relationships. You want to make sure that you are in good social standing with your friends or your spouse, whatever. You want to make sure those relationships are good. And then finally, the top level, the G, that's the growth. And that's where you want to invest in yourself. And a lot of this stuff is just, it's things that I have heard before, but thinking about them from a marketing and business perspective was a little bit different for me. I also really like the iteration model that he talked about. The wigwam, I think, is what he calls it, where you watch, ideate, guess, and then ask which one, and then act, and then measure. There's a lot of little things like this, which could just, if you tried just one of them, it would change how you're doing your marketing and your sales. And it could be the thing that kind of pushes you over, because like you were talking about, your online sales process has to be, for the most part, completely automated. So a lot of times the system isn't working and you're not getting the results. And if you don't deconstruct it and you don't have the blueprints like this to match up what you're doing with what's working and what's not, you can kind of guess, is this the thing that's broken? Nope. Okay, well, let's try something else. But I think that the way that he presents these different models and shows you the questions to ask, it's really easy to pinpoint some of those things.
Did you catch this story about the hero's journey?
Yeah, and this is something that Tan has been preaching to me for a while about this hero's journey, and about we want to tell the hero's journey in all of our content and stuff like that.
Right.
And I never really got the complete picture of it. But when he explained it in the book, he kind of broke it down into a couple different steps, which this is the kind of thing that really crystallized it for me. So number 1, you introduce the hero. Number 2, the hero has a call to adventure. And this could be your potential customer, where you're introducing them as the hero, and then they've got this call to adventure where they want to do this thing. And then the third part of this is there's a trial. So there's going to be some sort of hardship that they're going to have to go through. And then number 4 is the success. So you want to paint this picture of your customer, for example. If they buy your product, they're going to have victory and overcome this trial that they're facing right now. Number 5, you've got the riches, you've got the reward, you've got the promise of more time, or whatever, fill in the blank with whatever you're trying to sell. And then number 6, the return to normal life. So you've gone away, you've gone through this quest, this hero's journey, you've emerged victorious, now you return to normal life and you're just like anybody else. That, I think, is a really important piece, because a lot of times you can think about, well, yeah, that's great. That worked for that person, but it'll never work for me. And that's because you don't finish this hero's journey. You have to really paint the picture of the hero's journey of an individual who is not necessarily special, but they have this particular problem, and then show how they overcame this particular problem, show the benefit of the success, the reward that they got for actually completing this thing. And then now we've conquered this thing, we've slain the dragon, we return to normal life, and we teach other people how to do the exact same thing.
Wow, you spelled that out way more than I was gonna go into. I wasn't even gonna go into the whole steps thing. I was just imagining he spells out the whole heroes thing like you did very well there. And the only thing I could think of was Frodo and taking in Lord of the Rings, going through the whole thing. And I was trying to place that type of story into marketing, and it was just it was a weird story that I was playing out in my head. Anyway, it was something that was enlightening to me to see. So many times we see marketing things that are just rammed down our throat. You know, people are using scent and they're using all kinds of these word plays in order to get you to think a certain way. Like stuff like that kind of drives me crazy. But this one really struck me because it's one that I tend to resonate with. I mean, think about like Amazon reviews. You look for the people who say something along the lines of, my life was horrible, I found this, and now everything's good again. Like that's a
Yep.
very, very dumbed down version of it. But that's something that I find interesting because when I'm looking at reviews, or if I'm considering a product of some sort or a service that I want to contribute to, you know, if I'm looking at those, I tend to trust the people who have dealt with something negative and overcame it, and using that product or service is what helped them do that. You know, Frodo makes it over the mountain, you know, that type of thing. And whenever I think about some of the materials and the things that I put together to sell things, it made me wonder, do I ever do this? Like, that's what helps me buy. Why wouldn't I use that to sell? So it was enlightening to me to think through my current marketing efforts. You know, I'm looking at the freemium model, looking at this hero's journey. How can that help me write my materials in the future?
Yeah, exactly. And if you take this approach and you try to not only tell a hero's journey, but develop the hero's journey with the customers that you're working with, then that can really contribute to a really strong sense of purpose for the work that you're doing. I've discovered this with Agent Efficiency, where when we developed our email product, Escape Your Email, we've talked about the development process and how we interviewed people about their specific problems. And then we developed specific solutions for them, brought it back to them, said, here, try this, let us know if it works or not. But then once they do and they realize that it does work, then they become raving fans. And those are the type of people that you see on the website with the testimonials. And those kind of things really aren't that hard to get. All you have to do is focus on this hero's journey and focus on the actual story. But when you hear customers say, yeah, I did what you told me to do, and it completely changed my life, and now I've got so much more time to spend with my family, and I don't struggle with email. I went from dealing with it for 6 hours a day to an hour a day. That type of stuff is real. And when you can attach the story and the hero's journey to some of those people, it for me personally, and we've talked about core values and things like that, that's one of the things that connects me to my work at Agent Efficiency, is I really enjoy the idea of pulling other people up. And if you focus on the hero's journey, you can attach to those stories, and it can kind of give you increased motivation and increased purpose. It can become the why behind all of the things that you do. And I think that's really important.
I tell people this all the time. If you're looking for your mission in life, find a way to help people. You know, and
Exactly.
if you can figure out where, and to me, if you have a product or a business, it needs to solve a need, like something negative or a problem that people may not know needs solved, or helps enable something that currently wasn't possible. Like there's always something that's being overcome, a way to help people either understand, accomplish more, do more, not have a problem. Like you can always help people in some way. If you can find a way to help people, that's to me what brings most people. You know, you think about how people find joy in life. You talk to folks who are near the end of their life. if you summarize everything that they tell you and what brings them joy in life, it usually comes down to how they have helped or had relationships with other people.
Yep. But I guess what I'm saying is that don't just look to help people. If you're using the analogy of like a role-playing game, these are not non-playable characters that we are talking about here where you're trying to help them. Literally focus on helping the customers that you have become the hero. Put them in the place of utmost importance and help them solve their problem. And then this kind of stuff, I believe, will take care of itself.
That's like I tell other folks who are building plugins and stuff. It's like if you can find a way to help other people make money, you can make a lot of money at it. If you help other people do the thing that they want to do, yeah, you're better off. Next thing you got here, 3 universal currencies.
Yeah, this actually leads into, it ties together beautifully because the hero's journey, the problem that you're trying to solve for people, I would argue is always going to be to try to improve the amount of one of these 3 universal currencies. So number 1 is resources, and that's probably what most people think of when they think of currencies. How much money do you have? Number 2 is time, and this one I think is undervalued by a lot of people. And then number 3 is flexibility. Those 3 things I believe you need to have a balance of. This was a big reason why I took the job with Asian Efficiency, is that they offered me the time and the flexibility so that I could reframe my current schedule and I could, if I wanted to, take an afternoon off and go to the Children's Museum or go on a field trip with my family because we homeschool our 4 boys. But I think that it's a mistake to focus on just one of these things. I think you do need to make sure that you have a healthy balance here between the different things, the resources, the time, and the flexibility. And depending on your specific situation, you're probably going to value one of these higher than the others. But you can have all the money or all the resources in the world. If you don't have the time and the flexibility, you're not going to be happy. You can have the time and the flexibility. You can not have a job and have all the time in the world. But if you don't have money, you're not going to attract a spouse and start a family because you need to have all 3 of these things. And I think it again, this is one of those things where it's just a good reminder. When I read this, I was like, oh yeah, I need to make sure that all 3 of these accounts, so to speak, are full. And if I find myself really focusing on one particular season, taking a lot of side jobs and things like that, because I want to save up the money to finish my office, for example, I need to make sure that I'm doing that in a way where I'm not neglecting the time and the flexibility, which is the reason why I got the job that I have now in the first place. I have to remember the why behind all the things, basically.
All the things, all the great things. I was excited when I saw that you put Kaizen down here. So Kaizen, for people who don't know that, Mike, I know it. It immediately jumped off the page at me. So do you want to explain what that is before
Yeah,
I give you my spiel?
Kaizen is actually another one of the Asian Efficiency core values. And
So
the
what
basic
is with Asian efficiency? They're like all over this stuff.
yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I guess. But Kaizen is basically consistent improvement, and it comes from the Toyota not development model, I guess, but production model, where they famously several years ago gave anybody on the assembly line the ability to stop the assembly line for any reason and fix something, which, if you think about it, that's a pretty big responsibility because you have hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are all doing their job. And when the whole assembly line stops, that means all of those people cannot do their jobs. They are not building the cars anymore, and they are not able to sell the cars and make money. So this was a really radical idea back in the day. But what they did is they gave any employee the ability to pull the yellow cord and stop the assembly line. And when that happened, the managers would come over and they'd say, what did you see? Basically, what's out of place? What do we need to fix? And then the employee would mention that, oh, I saw this thing and we need to make sure that this is right. And they would always make sure that it was right. And they gave any employee the ability to do that whenever they wanted to. That's one of the things, again, I mentioned Asian Efficiency, one of our core values. One of the things I really like about working with Asian Efficiency is you can develop all these systems. You can have all of this stuff in place. And then you can just get head down focusing on, well, we got to do things according to the system, but you need to develop the ability to look at things and say, how can I make incremental improvements? How can I make this even better? And so one of the things that we do is we have, as part of our Scrum board, every single sprint, we have an issue which everybody tracks time against called Kaizen. And it's basically just, you put down on the issue, you comment on the issue, what specific system that you are looking to improve. And then you just go and you make fixes and you make changes to the currently existing systems. And everybody does this for a couple hours a week. And then everybody just logs their changes there. That type of stuff really makes a big difference in the long run. And we really just need to be careful that you don't just get stuck in, okay, this is the way things are. I really, really believe in the idea of Kaizen, not just at a professional level, but even on a personal level. Like, my wife and I have our family meetings on Sunday nights, and we talk about the different things, and we talk about what's working and what's not working. If you never take the time to ask, like, what is not working, you will never figure out what isn't working. You'll just continue to bang your head against the wall and wonder why things aren't working. So the whole idea of Kaizen, I think, can make your entire life easier.
So two things that jumped out whenever I saw Kaizen. One, and they're both development related, of course. One is what we refer to as continuous development or continuous improvement, I guess is another way to say it. Essentially, you're always releasing new fixes. So you don't do these massive, I'm going to put a release together, turn it loose, and then everybody downloads it, and away you go. The concept is that if I find something small, I tweaked and cleaned up the code, I push it right now. And you're just always pushing something new. It could be multiple times a day that happens. Sometimes some programs, you get an update on them every 3 or 4 weeks. Some cases, it's every 3 or 4 years. But, in some of the more advanced systems in today's world, they're every 3 or 4 hours, if that. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 times an hour. The other concept that this makes me think of is what we refer to as complaint-driven development. Effectively, you take the thing that has the most complaints against it, and that's what you work on. If I've got 1,000 clients or 1,000 customers on a specific set of software that I've written, and 400 of them are complaining about the same thing, I should probably go do something about it. But if I have 4 complaining about something, they may be really loud and be very vocal and, give me a whole bunch of feedback, but it's only 4 out of 1,000. I'm not going to touch that. If it's 50%, then I'm going to jump all over it. Now, those are really high numbers. If you get 50% of the people complaining, something's off. The whole thing went down. Amazon broke for the day. Something like that happened. But that's the concept. And the reason I bring those two up is because it's easy to say, I'm going to work on this, and by this date, I'm going to say I'm better at it, as opposed to, this is the thing I'm going to work on right now. This is the thing that needs stopped and put in place right now in order to continually get it better. And I like those concepts. At the same time, I feel like you have to be careful with some of this. It's too easy. Like, so much of this book is talking about systems, and this is how you do this, and this is how you do that, and this is how it gets better. And there's a lot of these things that just end up being a lot and a lot and a lot. The concern I have with that is a lot of the relational side comes up short, I guess. And the thing that he calls out that made me stop and think about it was this concept of an assistant buyer. And effectively what it is you come alongside somebody and explain the product, show the details, explain all of the difficulties that can come from using maybe a competitor product. I don't know what it is, but you get the concept. You're coming alongside the person who's potentially a buyer and helping them make that decision. And I struggle with figuring out how to do that online. I'm not going to see these people. In most cases, I will never know their first name. So how do you come alongside somebody and walk through the questions and help them understand it well enough so that they can make that purchase decision? I mean, from a technical standpoint, like, okay, build a web page and here's an FAQ and all this stuff. But to me, those are always cold and they don't really show the personal side of it. And it's something I struggle with. I would like to sit down and go through it with everybody. I feel like I could sell a lot of things if I could just sit down on a phone and go through things with people, but I can't do that online. I'm never going to get that level of detail and that level of personalization with an online product like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's two parts to this. So first, I think what you're talking about is the education-based selling, where you make the customer more informed so that what you are offering is of higher value. Uh, and I think along with that, a very important piece is later on page 180, he says, always focus the majority of your efforts on serving your ideal customers. Customers buy early, buy often, spend the most, spread the word, and are willing to pay a premium for the value you provide. The more ideal customers you can attract, the better your business. And so the way I interpreted this was when it comes to education-based selling and creating the value of the thing that you are trying to sell, be willing to not be the right solution for people. Don't try to be everything to everyone, and just identify who your ideal customer is and then serve them to the very best of your ability. And if you can do that, then you can attract more ideal customers like that, and you don't have to deal with, like you were saying, the people who are complaining about something, and so you're just responding to the things that they're complaining about, even though those people maybe are never going to buy anything from you again. I mean, we see that with people at Asian Efficiency. They complain about the content on our blog and in the podcast, but these are the people who never buy anything. And for every one of those, there's 10, 100 maybe people who are saying, oh my gosh, this stuff is amazing. It's really, really good. I've applied this principle that you talked about on the podcast, and it really changed things for me. And then I went ahead and I bought rituals or whatever. So don't worry about trying to make everybody happy, because you'll never be able to do that.
Yeah, don't do that. I say it all the time. Wait 3 weeks before you trust any feedback that you get on it, unless it's positive. Then I'm all over it. But if I release a new thing, I'm gonna get a bunch of people mad at me whenever it first comes out. I wait 3 weeks, see if they're still complaining about it, and then I'll do something.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to add here, going back to the Kaizen thing, and I think this also applies to the value of the product that you're throwing out there and serving your ideal customer. There was a really good quote in here by Alan Weiss. He says, improve by 1% a day, and in just 70 days, you're twice as good. Most people, I think, don't realize that the power, the compound effect that kicks in when you make those small incremental improvements. And it doesn't just have to be improvements to your systems and how you're doing things, which is kind of the approach that we take at Asian Efficiency, bringing this back to how do you become an assistant buyer when selling online? How do you do education-based selling? It could literally just be making the product that you are selling 1% better consistently. And then pretty soon you've got a really awesome product, which isn't going to be for everybody, but for the people that it's appropriate for, it's going to be the exact thing that they need. And they are going to become those raving fans.
Okay, I can't recall. You've got reference levels on here. I can't place what that is.
Sure. Reference levels. There's a quote he put in there, which I think that this is really what Bookworm is all about. He says, good books, magazines, blogs, documentaries, even competitors are valuable if they violate our expectations about what's possible. When you discover that other people are actually doing something you previously considered unrealistic or impossible, it changes your reference levels in a very useful way. And I think that just about every person who is listening to this podcast probably has some reference levels which they need to be violated. They need to have that paradigm shifted. They need to see things bigger, and they have to have a different picture painted of what is actually possible. And that's the kind of thing that reading all of these books really helps with. This one in particular, a lot of different business systems where it's like, oh, we don't really have to struggle with things like this. There is a better way to do this. The next book, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and we've got a special guest who's going to be joining us for that one, the 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. That one in particular, his whole mission in that book is to just destroy and annihilate your expectations of what you think is possible. And I can say in my own life, I've talked about the process of writing the book and how that led to my work with Asian Efficiency and all of these things now where it's like, why would anybody listen to me? Why would anyone care about my perspective on this stuff? It's because my reference levels have been pushed. They've been adjusted, and the boundaries have been pushed. I've been able to push those things because I can take the course, I can read the book, I can listen to the podcast, I can see other people who are going through this hero's journey, and I can say, well, if they did it, if it worked for them, then maybe that'll work for me too. And just stepping out there and doing it, I think that's really what this is all about, is helping people escape their definition of status quo or their definition of normal, and to just put themselves out there and try something that you think maybe isn't possible. Get a bigger vision, get a bigger picture about what's possible, and then just step out there and see what happens. Because a lot of times just the energy and the action that you take, that translates into motion, that produces results that are a lot bigger than you could even possibly imagine. I didn't envision myself in this position that I am in right now when I decided to get up and start writing every day before work. But one thing leads to another, and then before long, you've got a much better version of things than you could have possibly projected before you had gotten a bigger canvas to work with, if that makes sense.
I think it's fun to destroy expectations when it comes to like glass ceilings. And like, okay, I think I can accomplish this. Well, this person did something that maybe indicates that you could triple that. It's kind of fun to see what people do if you have a way to show that where they think their maximum ability is actually much higher. What's the thing with marathon runners? Whenever they feel like they're exhausted and they can't go any further, they've actually used, I think, 40% of their energy? They still have 60% left in the tank or something like that. I'm not a marathoner, couldn't tell you, not planning to do that. Not a long distance runner, not for me. But the concept is that typically when it comes to our bodies, when we feel like we can't do anymore, that number is actually at 40%. Like, we're not actually at the cap. We're not even halfway there. So
Yep.
If you can help people see that in so many arenas, that you start to open up a lot of doors for people, and it starts to help people see that, yes, I can do more. Maybe I'm not going to procrastinate as much anymore on this. I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to keep at it, and I can do more than what I think I can currently. I think this steps into your next point here, the acrasia versus procrastination, because, if I define, most people don't know, what is acrasia? No, I'm not a crazy one. Not that. Okay, no comment there. But acrasia, essentially what it is putting something off to the future. We know something would be in our best interest, but we don't do it. There's something I feel and know that I should do, but I ain't gonna do it because I don't wanna. Like, that whole concept is acrasia versus procrastination. To me, they're basically the same thing. Just my opinion.
Procrastination, the definition he gave, is avoiding the task that you know you need to do. Acrasia, like you mentioned, knowing that something is in our best interest, but we don't do it anyway. So an example would be, I should quit smoking. Acrasia, and maybe I'm saying this wrong. I guess I just read it and read it acrasia.
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 That's
okay.
how he gives a pronunciation in here.
I missed that. So acrasia, that is lacking command over yourself. Going back to the reference levels for a little bit, and also kind of tying into this whole idea of acrasia and identifying like what is possible. There was a story, actually ESPN picked it up, about a pastor in LA, I believe, Matthew Barnett, who's the pastor of the Dream Center Church. He has been training for a while. He set out to do the World Marathon Challenge, which I thought about when you were talking about marathon running. What it literally is 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 different continents. The first one is in Antarctica. And so he'd been training for a while. He did this World Marathon Challenge, and I think it was the 4th marathon, his knee popped. And ESPN picked up the story because even though he had this knee injury, he finished all of the marathons. And he's telling the story now about how, when his knee popped, he thought he was done. And there was always somebody who, in all the different marathons, who saw him and ran the race with him. And he talked about how basically he just had resolved in his mind that there was no way that he could return without completing this world marathon challenge. And so he was able to do it. And it just really showed that story in particular, the power of your belief system. And so when it comes to acrasia and procrastination and these things that we talk ourselves out of because we're so dang lazy, we're capable of so much more than we realize a lot of times. And he talks about there's 4 general parts to acrasia. So number 1 is the task. Number 2 is the desire or the want. Number 3 is a should. So I should do this thing because I want this result. And then number 4 is the emotional experience of resistance. That is where the rubber meets the road, is that emotional experience of resistance. Most people, when they encounter emotional resistance, I don't want to do this thing because it'll make me uncomfortable. That is the hardest battle for people to win. And I think that you can actually condition yourself to overcome this on a daily basis if you wanted to, simply by employing something like at Asian Efficiency to talk about eating that frog, doing your most important task, the hardest thing at the beginning of your day. Because this is a muscle. If you can just consistently take action on those things that you need to do and you don't feel like doing them, you can develop the ability to overcome this kind of at will. And I think that ultimately that could play out as something like Matthew Barnett being able to finish those marathons. Maybe you're not trying to finish a world marathon challenge. Maybe you're trying to get your product launched or your book written or whatever. Consistently look for those ways and create those situations where you can win every day, where you can overcome acrasia and procrastination, because it's a habit. Winning and losing are both a habit. And if you can consistently win over acrasia and procrastination, then that will take you a long way.
We had like 3 to 4 books in a row where a certain person was mentioned. How do you say this, Mike? Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah,
yes. He was on page 255, I believe.
Yep, I saw that name and I was like, oh, here we go again. Mike, you're going to have to say this for me again. Anyway, I didn't have anything about that I wanted to talk about other than we got Mihaly back.
Yep, absolutely.
But Mihaly came up in a section that was talking about working with yourself, which I felt like was pretty much a productivity crash course, which is partly why I felt like I was more fascinated by that section than a lot of the others. It's like, oh, okay, here we go. I know this one. Oh, I know this one. Oh, I know this one. Like there was a lot of those. It was fun. Anyway, the one that was interesting to me is this whole multitasking thing. It amazes me that people still think multitasking is something that's positive. But it seems to be it's driven down our throats. Like, you can't multitask. Like, this is not possible. It's one of those things that I get tired of seeing over and over and over again, and yet I realize people do it constantly. It's like, come on, people. If you're listening to this, stop multitasking. We all know it's bad for you, and you can't actually do it.
Yes, you cannot actually do it. In fact, on page 258, he says, neurologically, it's impossible to multitask. When you try to do more than one thing at a time, you're not really parallel processing, which is what most people think when they're quote unquote multitasking. But you are rapidly switching attention from one thing to another. If you really understood that, there are a lot of things that you would stop doing. You would stop trying to multitask in particular situations, because you would identify that this thing that I'm supposed to be working on, this is really important. And this is where Mihaly comes in too. I mean, he's the guy who really wrote the book on flow. And so getting into the whole idea of deep work, where you're going deep on a specific topic or a specific work area, a specific task, because this is the thing that's of most importance. You're sabotaging yourself when you try to multitask, or even you're not trying to multitask, but you leave the door open to interruptions. Like, you leave your email open and you hear those dings and those notifications, and it changes what you're able to do drastically, because you have to switch your cognitive context every time that you do it. He talks about the cognitive switching penalty in this book. You basically have to load the context for the task that you are switching to every single time that you switch. And so the solution to this is to batch your tasks, to identify that, okay, from this period, I am going to work on email and I am not going to touch it before then, because I know that jumping back and forth all the time is not going to make me productive. And this is something that is really basic in the productivity world. But like you said, it really makes me want to cry whenever I see people doing this. Like you're hurting yourself. You have to stop this. And kind of along the same lines here, he presents a method, the 3-10-20 method. Did you catch that?
I did not. It sounds familiar, but I can't place it.
Okay, so this is, I thought, a really great idea for identifying what you're going to work on in any particular day, because that's something that we hear at Agent Efficiency all the time is how many tasks should I identify to work on in my task manager? And it's going to be different for every person, but he lays out this 3-10-20 method as a way of providing like a benchmark of this is what you should kind of shoot for. Okay, so three major tasks, okay, in any given day. So you want to have 3 major tasks, and 10, that's 10 minor tasks. And the distinction here is that major tasks are tasks that take more than 20 minutes. And I think that articulating it this way provides a really good framework for anybody who's using OmniFocus or any other task manager when they're sitting down and they're planning their next day and you're trying to decide, what am I going to try to get done tomorrow? I think this provides a framework that is a great place to start.
The golden trifecta. I like the title of this section. Effectively, what this is, he has a personal 3-word summary of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a book by Dale Carnegie, if I remember correctly.
I believe that's correct.
Yep. So the 3-word summary: appreciation, courtesy, and respect. So expressing gratitude for what others are doing for you, even if it's not perfect. Having the courtesy to be polite, pure, and simple. Don't drag things out. Don't be too wordy. Respect, a matter of honoring the other person's status, no matter how you relate to the person you're communicating with. And I thought this was helpful because I've not read that book, and I know that I should. Sorry. Someone probably needs to get it on our list. But it's something that it makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about how you get work done with other people. How do I go about working with my potential clients? How do I sell to them? How do I have my relational interactions with existing clients and my continuing customer relationships, I guess? How do I go about building those and making sure that they are top-notch? And this simple 3-word, appreciation, courtesy, and respect, it really struck home. It was a good way for me to summarize a lot of how I want to be to the people that I'm working with.
Yeah, I mean, when I read this, I thought of Chris Bailey, The Productivity Project, and when he talks about how people are the reason for productivity. All you really have to do is not focus on yourself, focus on other people, and basically the rest of it's going to take care of itself. But along with this, I still am having a little bit of trouble reconciling this, because actually right before this section, he shares a quote by Charles Boyle. He says, "If not controlled, work will flow to the competent man until he submerges." I've experienced this. So how do you balance, I guess I'm just wanting to hear your perspective. How do you balance serving other people via the golden trifecta, showing them appreciation, courtesy, and respect, while still standing up for your own rights and setting those limits, which you need to do in order to be productive? I would say one area where this can be extremely difficult would be in a church setting, because a lot of the people that are in a church, it's basically, my pastor has described it, a volunteer army. Okay, so you're trying to coordinate all of these people who this isn't their job. They're not getting a paycheck. You can't tell them, do this or you're out of here. So how do you look to serve people while still maintaining your own personal integrity when it comes to your schedule and making sure that you are becoming the best version of yourself so that you can be of more value, more benefit to other people?
But see, that's a coaching time to me. So I'm director of IT at our church, and I deal with a ton of volunteers. That's the mass of our team is volunteers, and a lot of times I will run across situations where someone's potentially breaking a boundary. They're crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed, and what do you do? I mean, you can't fire them. You can't get upset. You can't say no. You got to do it this way. It's like, well, it takes a little more on my side to show the respect to teach them, hey, if you go this route, you're going to have a better situation. Like, it'll be a lot better for you if we go this way. Now, I'm summarizing that so it sounds harsh and terse the way I just said that. But if you take the time to understand that person well enough to be able to speak into their life that way, and if I'm doing my job well as a director of IT and building those relationships, it's a simple flow of a normal conversation. Does that make sense? It's not, they're not in competition with each other.
It makes sense, but I think it can be difficult when you've got different teams, different organizations that are maybe playing by different rules. But I think that there's a key in one of the things that he mentions where he says, don't focus on the problem, focus on the options. So let's just use the church context and the golden trifecta, where you want to put other people first, but at the same time, maybe there's some systems here that are broken and we want to fix them. So we've talked about this in previous podcasts. Take responsibility, take accountability, and don't focus on, well, whose fault is it? How did we get here? That's not going to necessarily help, although that's probably my initial response every single time I try to deconstruct things and identify what are the actions that got us into this situation so that we can't do this again. But if you're really going to embrace the golden trifecta and you're going to live this out, what you want to focus on is, where do we go from here? Not necessarily whose fault is it, but what can I do specifically to fix this so that the team and the organization can be successful going forward. But I think that's a lot easier said than done a lot of times.
I don't know. I stick by the if you gotta know people, and if I'm gonna have a conversation and something's not going right, that I need to step in and do something. A lot of times, like, okay, here's something that I feel we need to do, and as director of IT, I can do this. So that situation might be a little different, because in my case, if something's off, and the sound team needs to be taking control of something, and currently the video team is doing it, or vice versa, people may not be happy about those changes. And what I see as my goal is to help them see the benefit to them, or help them come up with the idea itself. Like, to me, that's my job more than anything, is helping people come up with that. Even though I'm in IT, welcome to tech support. Like, that's how I come at it. It takes a lot of. I have to really appreciate what the people are doing and help them see that I'm appreciative of what they're doing, and have the constructive criticism at the same time. Something I do quite a bit. I did this quite a bit whenever I worked in corporate, was this concept of yes, no, yes. Are you familiar with this at all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so whenever I have something that needs to change, someone's not going to like it, I use the yes, no, yes process. So very, very dumbed down and very basic. Thank you so much for the help you're doing. Here's something you need to get better at. This is awesome. Let's continue working together. Like, that's a very dumbed down way of saying it. Now, it's going to be a lot more drawn out. It's going to be a lot more detailed. And the more I can put into the yeses as opposed to the no, better off we are in the long run. And I use that quite a bit. Even there's a couple guys on the team that know that I do it, and they still tell me they're grateful that I do it. So it's like, okay, this is something I know helps, because I want you to know that I like what you're doing, and it's helpful and it's great for the team as a broader sense. And yet this is an area where I feel like we could grow. And I know that if I spell it out in that way, everybody's happy in the end, typically. Every once in a while, you got somebody that's just always going to be negative. And even though it's volunteer based, I have been known to let other people, you're not allowed to volunteer here until we get this figured out. Like, we have had to do that before. And those are very rare, and it kind of hurts whenever you have to do that. But sometimes the people who are there are more toxic than they are helpful. And you have to know where to draw that line, and it's different in every situation.
Yep, I definitely agree with you. I just think that that can be difficult, especially with people who you're going to see on a regular basis, to have that conversation and be like, you're not really in the right position to do this thing right now. That can be really difficult, but it kind of gets into the next point here, the 6 principles of management as well. Should I just run through these real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. So number 1 is recruit the smallest group of people who can accomplish what must be done quickly and with high quality. I think this is a really important piece, and I think that the tendency can kind of be to recruit a bunch of people to these teams, and the bigger that they get, the less agile they are, and the harder it is to actually take action and accomplish our goals. So I think that's important, to recruit the smallest group of people you can and still accomplish the goal. Number 2, clearly communicate the desired end result, who's responsible for what, and the current status. Number 3, we just talked about, treat people with respect. Number 4, create an environment where everyone can be as productive as possible, then let them do their work. Number 5, refrain from having unrealistic expectations regarding certainty and prediction. And then number 6, measure to see if what you're doing is working, and if not, try another approach.
I feel like if everybody would go through and do this when they're in management, life would be a lot better for the broader world.
Yep, definitely.
How many managers break at least half of these?
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah, and that kind of actually leads into the next point here, the analytical honesty. I mean, especially the 6th point, where we want to measure and then we want to change things if what we're doing isn't working. Analytical honesty, he defines it in the book as measuring and analyzing data dispassionately, which is a really, I don't know, I think just about anybody who is in charge of pulling together numbers for the purpose of interpreting data to tell a story is guilty of this in some way, shape, or form, where they pull numbers together, which will paint the situation in a positive light to tell their version of the events or the story that they want to communicate. So analytical honesty is literally just not approaching the numbers or the data with any sort of agenda or feelings, but just looking at it to say, okay, what is actually going on here? And I think that's a lot harder to do than it would seem.
So, story time. Joe used to be a data analyst. I used to work corporate, and I had at my disposal some massive databases. And by the time I was there for probably 2 months, I had developed a habit of sending my data results in PDF formats. And the goal of that was to stop anybody up above me from editing the data, because it was a problem for me to see a document that I had prepared with data that was not entirely accurate. It was technically correct, but it painted the wrong story. Mm-hmm. And it drove me crazy, because that's not what the data says. Like, you can't do that. Like, that's that was one very small reason I left there. But I mean, there was a lot of things that played into that. But so much of the integrity of the data, even down to how you put a chart together. Like, I could put together a chart that shows technically correct data, but makes you think the opposite of what the data says. Like, you can do that, and I'm hypersensitive to it. You're going to get me on a soapbox. I need to stop. Anyway, it's a problem if you have a lot of data, you're measuring things, and you have a story you hope or want to be true. You have to stay objective. You can't let your preconceived notions or theories impact how you run the data. You have to use tried and true principles and do it. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, the other thing I'll add to this is that the correlation is not necessarily causation when it comes to interpreting data. So if you're looking for a way to show that something is growing or something is shrinking or whatever, you can usually find some sort of correlation between things, but you have to dig deeper and you have to understand exactly what the numbers are telling you. And depending on the specific situation, that is a lot more work than people think. It's easy to just kind of cherry pick specific statistics and say, oh, look, the podcast numbers are growing, the downloads are going up, that sort of thing. But if 1 month there were 5 Mondays and you release every Monday, and the next month there were 4, it's going to come back and bite you at some point if you're trying to manipulate the data and make it tell a specific story. The other thing I want to tease out here is the whole section on systems at the end. I thought that there was some good stuff in here, but like I mentioned at the beginning, I also thought it was pretty elementary when it comes to systems. And I was kind of disappointed that there wasn't a whole lot new or deep here, other than on page 400, he talks about standard operating procedures, reducing friction, minimizing willpower depletion. We've talked with the checklist manifesto, how checklists are actually externalized SOPs. But a lot of this stuff I thought was really, really basic. So kind of disappointed in that particular section. But very end, last thing here, and I love the way that he ended this book. He talks about how self-education is never done. So just because you've gone through this particular book, there's always going to be more ground to take. You want to keep changing your reference levels. And I thought that how he ended the book was a really good call to action to keep going and keep growing.
Thus, why we do Bookworm. Always getting better. Always learning
Exactly.
something more. Here we are. Action items. You got a handful here. You go first.
Yeah, there were a lot of these. Okay, so the ones that I wrote down here were, number 1, create a back burner context in OmniFocus. So things that I don't necessarily want to work on right now, but having a kind of like a waiting for or a list of things that are ready to be picked up and move forward, but it's not just a someday maybe list, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm describing that.
That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Okay, so let me see if I can find the specific section where he talked about this, because we did not talk about everything in this book.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, it's 400 something pages. Yeah, basically just the back burner context. These are things that I want to say right now, I'm not going to work on these things, but it's kind of like a on deck or next up list, because there are things that on a day-to-day basis, I do not want these things appearing in my task list. These are not things that I want to work on right now. They're not available yet, so to speak. But the back burner context is basically a bunch of things that I know I want to do when I have a little bit of time. And it's kind of like a curated waiting for list already. I don't know if that makes sense.
How is that different than a someday maybe?
Yeah, well, for the GTD purists, they're going to say this, and they're going to say, well, you're going through your weekly, your someday maybe list every week anyways.
Maybe I'm a GTD purist then. I don't think of myself that way.
Yeah, I guess my specific scenario, I tend to throw things onto the someday maybe list, and then that's kind of the place that they go to die.
Okay, so instead of deleting things, you put them on a someday maybe, which means that your someday maybe is completely diluted.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And so the back burner
so you
context
need a new
was,
level of someday maybe.
I guess. Yeah.
I'm just giving you grief now.
It's not necessarily different priority levels, because I don't like the fact that, some people have task management systems. They have priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. And really, if you've got a bunch of things that are priority, that just means that nothing is. It's not necessarily different priority levels, but it is the next place to look when I want to move something else forward, instead of going back to the someday maybe list and going through the big archive of things that, talk about the 6 different horizons of GTD, the 50,000, the 40,000, 30,000, like the 3 to 5 year thing. That's not going to be on my back burner context, but something that I want to do in the next 3 to 6 months, that would be there. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this very well.
Okay. I'll let you go with it. Okay.
Okay. Another thing that they talked about in here, next action item I have, is to look into speed reading. I think he called it priming. And there's actually a course by Abby Marks Beal, which is on speed reading, and I believe I have access to it. So I'm going to look into this, and I'm going to try to embrace speed reading. Maybe not for this podcast where we're going through these books and we're trying to tease out the things that are really standing out to us, but for the gap books that we had talked about and the things that I want to get through these, but I don't necessarily want to try and tease out everything that I possibly can out of this book. I just want to get the 80-20 of what the subject here is, that sort of thing. I'm going to give speed reading a shot.
Okay.
Number 3 is to have a set time for my most important task to be done by, which I am going to say is 10 a.m.
Okay.
And this was just something that he talked about, and I really liked that idea of putting a deadline on there for my most important task. I think I've done a pretty good job in the past of identifying my most important tasks and then saying, okay, I'm going to work on these today. I'm going to get these 3 major things done, but having a specific time where I'm going to have those things done by, I think that might help a lot. And then the last one is to review goals every single day.
I thought you did this.
No, I'm pretty terrible at this.
Okay.
I need to not just write down specific goals, but I want to write them in such a way that I look over them every single day. And I want to actually incorporate this into my morning routine. One of the gap books that I read while we were in Florida was The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. And he has a very specific format that he uses for the morning ritual. And part of that is affirmations and gratitude and stuff like that. And visualization, that's where the goals come in. So I want to articulate them in a way where I can very briefly say in 3 to 5 years, I'm going to have this specific thing, where I've got that stuff kind of in different places right now, but I want to make sure that it is clean, concise, it's condensed, and I can go through it in a couple minutes every single morning just to kind of center myself and make sure that I'm connected to the why and I'm moving things forward.
So for my goals, I'm still on the 12-week year thing, and I treat those as my daily goals that I review. And I've got the breakout per week of where I need to be on each one of those. That's what I use for it. Seems to work well. Anyway, there we go. Okay, so I've got a couple here. First one is get back on the horse. It bugs me to say this, have been bad at sticking with OmniFocus, and I've been not so great about sticking to my lists and using my checklists, and yeah, things kind of got chaotic with me from a business standpoint, and it started to stress me out really bad, and this book made me realize, oh, I'm stressed out because I'm not working my own systems. I write about this stuff. What's wrong with you, Joe? Anyway, thus, I'm admitting publicly I need to get back on the horse. The second, I want to rethink some of my marketing strategies. I've been pretty bad about the whole self-promotion piece, and it's because, and I'm only just now learning this, it's because I have a reservation with forcing my thoughts onto somebody else. I don't want to run something down another person's throat because I think it would be good for them. I want to help them see that it's the right thing. And that's what I mean by rethinking my marketing strategies, because I feel like if I think it through the right way, I can do that online. I just don't have the answer right now. So I want to take some time and figure that out.
Nice.
That's what I got. Author style. I need you to go first on this one.
So I really liked the author's style. Basically, the way the book is set up, we mentioned at the beginning, it's 268 small sections, And on any one of those, you could go deeper and have an entire book worth of content. But it's kind of jumps from thing to thing, which can be positive or negative. I happen to really like it. And in fact, a couple of the different sections, he mentions additional resources and additional books if you wanted to dive deeper on one of those things. And that's one of the gap books, actually, that I've got it from going through this one. But I really liked it. And with the exception of the systems section, I got a lot out of this book. That was the only point where it was kind of hard for me to read, just because I guess I'm around systems all the time and something that we preach at Asian Efficiency a lot. So it was kind of elementary to me. Other than that, I absolutely love this book. So I am going to give it 4.5 stars.
Wow, nice. So I'm conflicted by this one because I'm with you. There's a lot of great information here. There's a lot of great stuff to glean from it and enjoy it. But if I go back to the book, The Shallows, and there was a whole section in there about how books in print form may start to take some of the online and the digital formats. And when that starts to happen, you start to lose some of the comprehension that can come with how the book's written. To me, when I read this, it made me angry because I wanted him to spell some things out, and I felt like he skimmed over some pieces, and it just got under my skin. Maybe that's just my personality, but I felt like I was reading hundreds of blog posts. Like, that's what it feels like. They're a page and a half, 2 pages, maybe 3 pages long for each quote-unquote chapter, and it bugged me. I was fine at first, and then once I think I got to maybe the finance section, maybe it was the finance section that I didn't like, but the overall layout of it it got under my skin. That's what I got on that. But I agree with you. I think the material itself is top notch. I think there's a lot of good things there. I just didn't care for the layout. But again, I understand why he did it that way. He's trying to cover a lot of ground, and the only way to cover that amount of ground in that few pages, like how many pages did you say this was? 400? 407, something like that. If you're going to cover an entire MBA's worth of information in a single book, you have to do this. I'm not gonna say that he made a bad decision here. I think that just the choice of book per my personality maybe doesn't mesh real well. But I don't have anybody to blame but myself on that one. Whoops.
I think that's completely fair. And I guess my perspective is maybe tainted a little bit because I recognize the fact that these are basically blog posts. I think that's actually how the project started, was just a bunch of blog posts that he turned into a book. But I think that he does a really good job of recommending good resources. In fact,
he did.
I've finished this book as we're recording this now several weeks ago, because we've tried to record it a couple different times and I've been sick. But I actually flew through this and I ordered some of the additional resources. Like one of the books that you mentioned, the accounting, that he recommends is Financial Intelligence for Entrepreneurs. And I have not been disappointed by the follow-up books that he recommends if you did want to go deeper on specific topics. But I can totally understand where you see that he's only spending 3 pages on accounting and you're like, that's not enough. You need to know so much more. You're absolutely right. You do need to know so much more. The fact that you've read through this book does not necessarily equate to a MBA degree, but there is, in my opinion, a lot of great information here.
I think it does a very good job of introducing things. Like it does. Maybe that's my problem, is I had my expectations set differently. And whenever I go through this, I'm like, I thought it was a book, not a bunch of blog posts. Like that's cranky old Joe here. But all of that said, I'm very conflicted on how to rate this, because the material I absolutely loved. It was the format that gave me all kinds of problems. So I'm going to, part of me wants to give it a 3, part of me wants to give it a 5. So I'm going to give it a 4 and stop there.
All right. Sounds good. So upcoming books, the one that we've got coming up next with a special guest. Do we want to announce who the special guest is going to be?
We did last time.
Oh, did we? Okay. Well, yeah, I guess then go back.
And you did earlier in this show too.
No, I don't think I teased it at the beginning of the show. I mentioned we're going to have a special guest, but Sean Blanc is going to be joining us for the 10X rule. That is going to be by Grant Cardone. And And this one I'm excited to talk about. I'm interested to get Sean's perspective and how he's applied this to his business. But this is one of those books that we talked about, reference levels, that can really change your reference levels.
Yeah. I'm 3/4 the way through this. Well, no, I'm further than that. So as we record this, we're recording that one tomorrow, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, that'll be a good one. I'm excited about that conversation. Following the 10x rule, we are jumping back into. We've talked about the Dave Ramsey books that he has his new hires read, and this is another one of those, Rhinoceros Success by Scott Alexander. I don't know much about it other than I think it'll be interesting to read a book about success after we read the 10x rule, which seems to be all about success. So that'll be interesting. For Gap books, I'm finishing up a book called Starting Strength by Mark Ripito. I've wanted to get into barbell training for a while, and I figured Mark Ripito is one of those guys that seems to have it all together and knows it really well, and he teaches you the process of actually doing them the right way in that book. So I'm going through it. I've got a gym out in the wood shop that I'm planning to use for it, so we'll see how that goes. I've never really been one that works out or exercises, so we'll see how this goes.
All right. And my Gap book, I'm going to put one that I picked up from the personal MBA here, and that is Mindfulness in Plain English, because we didn't talk about this, but he also talked about meditation yet again. And this was the book that he recommended for this. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the guy's name, but this was one that he says, like, this is the definitive book on this. So I've been pleasantly surprised with the financial intelligence for entrepreneurs. Haven't started this one yet, but I intend to. Maybe this is one of those ones that I'll try out my new speed reading technique on.
There you go. That'll make a lot of sense. Let's speed read a book about mindfulness.
Yeah. So if you wanted to recommend a book, you can do that. We love it when people recommend books. We've got a growing list. You can go to bookworm.fm/list, and you can see a list of all of the books that we've covered so far, as well as the ones that are planned. And there's a link right at the top to recommend a book. So if you want to go there and recommend something you want to hear us talk about, that would be the place to do it.
And we're always interested in the feedback that people have on what we're talking about. And there's a couple different ways that you can leave feedback on what you're hearing here. One is to go to iTunes, leave a review there. There's a link to the podcast on iTunes in the show notes. That's extremely helpful. We've talked about it every week. It's a great way to help other people find the show. Another way to leave feedback, I didn't vet this with you, Mike. I didn't even really intend this, but it's kind of morphed into that, is that the discussion site that I have behind my website at joebulig.com, I have a discussion forum that follows up with comments on every article I post out there. And there's been a handful of people that have been starting to have conversations about the books and the shows there as well. I didn't really intend that. It just kind of started happening. But there you go. If you want to follow up on that. The one that we've been talking about a lot lately is the Checklist Manifesto. It's been good. There you go.
Yep, you dragged me into that as well.
I know. So. It's like, oh, Mike's not over here. We need to get Mike drug into this.
Yep. So definitely check out Joe's discussion site. Give us feedback. We want to know how you are implementing some of the stuff that we're talking about, the changes that you're seeing. But thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.